This is Euronews Tonight. Here are your top stories. Russia strikes Kiev for the first time in weeks as the UK announces it is sending new rocket launcher systems to Ukraine. Could the party be over for Boris Johnson? The British Prime Minister faces a vote of confidence which would force him to step down if he loses.
Ryanair faces backlash for forcing South African passengers to fill out a test in Afrikaans. We'll have the story.
And German car maker Mercedes-Benz announces it is recalling nearly 1 million vehicles over potential problems with their braking systems. I'm Helena Humphrey. Good to have you with us. Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned that Moscow will look to attack new targets following missile strikes on Ukraine's capital, Kiev. Ukrainian officials say that Moscow launched 5 cruise missiles towards the city, the first attack on the area in over a month. Well, the country's atomic operator warned of a possible nuclear disaster after one cruise missile flew close to a nuclear plant south of the city. The UK Defence Ministry says that the attack was likely an attempt to disrupt Western arms shipments to Ukraine. The governor of Luhansk claims that Ukrainian forces have regained half of Severodonetsk. Fierce fighting has taken place in the city. Some 15,000 civilians are still sheltering in the area. On Monday, President Zelensky said that his soldiers in Severodonetsk are holding their ground, but did warn that the Russians are more numerous and more powerful. Well, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has been forced to cancel his visit to the Serbian capital Belgrade after his plane was blocked from entering the airspace of Serbia's surrounding countries. Lavrov said that the decision was outrageous and described the move as an act of hostility by NATO.
The decisions that were taken by some members of NATO and the decisions that prevented the implementation of the visit of the Russian foreign minister to Serbia are certainly unthinkable.
I
understand the interest you show in our assessment of these outrageous actions. There was a deprivation of the right of the sovereign state to carry out foreign policy.
Well, our correspondent Galina Polanskaya is covering this story. We can go straight over to her now. Good evening to you, Galina. Good to see you. Some pretty strong words there from Lavrov in response to that closing of airspace, preventing him from landing in Belgrade. So what now? Any hints of Russian retaliation?
Good evening, Helena. While Sergei Lavrov said that at this point Russia will not retaliate, not to harm the relations, as I said, between the people, but he surely stressed one thing. He said that no one will be able to destroy the relations between Russia and Serbia, and we have indeed had very, very strong words from him. He condemned the decision of Bulgaria, North Macedonia and Montenegro to ban his flight to pass to Serbia, said that it was unthinkable, unprecedented and outrageous, and surely stressed that it was NATO and the EU to blame. He said that the Brussels policy in Ukraine and the Balkans was the same and promised that nothing will stand in the way between Russia and Serbia, that Serbian foreign minister was invited to Russia and that this visit might happen very soon. The Kremlin has also commented what has happened and called those actions to ban the flight of Russia's foreign minister hostile.
And we've also heard today from Lavrov with regards to the delivery of those longer-range missiles coming from the UK now as well as from the United States. We know that Putin said in response to that he would increase his lists of targets. Do we know where those targets are?
Well, Vladimir Putin just said that Russia will draw appropriate conclusions, that it will use its arms to strike, I quote, at those targets which Russian forces has not yet been hitting. He did not precise what are those targets, where they are located, but Sergei Lavrov gave more explanations. He said, and I quote, the longer the range of the missiles that the West supplies to Kiev will be, the further we will push the Nazis away from the territories where the threat to Russia comes from. And we have also heard some comments that I find important from the head of Russia's Defense Committee in the State Duma, the lower house of Russian parliament. He said that Russia may strike at the infrastructure and state institutions in Ukraine in case of deliveries of long-range missiles. And he also said that it was not excluded that peacekeepers from the Collective Security Treaty Organization might be used at the territories in Ukraine controlled by Russia.
All right, Galina Polinskaya, our correspondent, as ever. Galina, good to talk to you. Thanks for that. Well, I want to get the view of Brad Bowman now. He is the Senior Director of the Centre on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. He's also a former Black Hawk helicopter pilot himself. Brad, as always, great to have you on the programme. As we were just discussing, the UK has now joined the United States in sending over those rocket launchers. There's been so much about this, really, since the beginning of the war, discussing whether these kinds of weapons would be appropriate. Something's changed here. What do you think that calculation was?
Thanks for the opportunity to join you. Thanks for the question. I think what has changed is the nature of the combat has evolved. You know, after Putin bit off more than he could chew, if you will, and going for Kiev and launching armored columns not supported by artillery or infantry, we've seen them kind of downsize their ambitions and really just focus on the Donbass region, Donetsk and Luhansk. And that region has a different topography that is more conducive to artillery warfare. So we're seeing an artillery duel in that region that is brutal. We've seen the Russians making incremental gains. And we see in many cases the Ukrainians are outranged and outgunned. And so they've been asking for these longer range artillery systems for quite some time. And now the U.S. announced last week they would be providing the high mobility artillery rocket systems, or HIMARS, which will roughly double the range over the towed artillery the U.S. had already provided. And now the British are saying that they'll want to provide also, as your team has reported, the multiple launch rocket system. Both that and the HIMARS will roughly double the range that the Ukrainians have in terms of artillery inventory.
Talking about that then, talking about doubling the range, I mean, these weapons have been characterised as attack weapons as opposed to defensive ones. And Putin has been saying that if they come from countries like the UK, like the US, he's been trying to couch that as saying these countries then are directly involved. So do you think that could potentially lead from Russia's side to an escalation at this moment? Is this a pivotal moment in this conflict?
Well, you know, Putin can always escalate, but let's remember where we are. This is the largest invasion in Europe since World War II. You know, we hear Foreign Minister Lavrov talking about the sovereignty of Russia. Excuse me, what about the sovereignty of Ukraine? Right? This is really Russian gall at its what we've long come to see. You know, Ukraine has a right to defend itself. The MLRS system, the multiple launch rocket system, the HIMARS systems that the U.S. are providing, these are going to be targeting the tens of thousands of invading Russian forces in Ukraine. So for Putin to suggest that this is a threat to Russia in any way is ridiculous, and I think should be seen as such.
Briefly, if you don't mind, Brad, in terms of having these weapons, putting them into the equation, how do they change things on the ground? Could we see a recalibration from the Ukrainians, or do you predict instead that the Russians might just go even harder?
The primary benefit of these weapons is they increase the range of Ukrainian forces. They provide them additional precision, more agility and mobility, and more survivability. And all of those things will help impact the balance of power between the Russian and Ukrainian forces as Ukraine fights this unprovoked invasion and defends their homes.
All right, Brad Bowman, Senior Director of the Centre on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Pleasure to talk to you. Thank you. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is facing a confidence vote following a rebellion within the ranks of his own party. Now, enough Conservative MPs have submitted letters of doubt over Johnson's leadership to trigger a ballot that will decide his future as Prime Minister. Neil O'Reilly has more now on the story.
A day of destiny for Boris Johnson. After months of deepening scandals and growing discontent among his party, the British Prime Minister is to face a vote of confidence from Conservative MPs today. It could lead to him stepping down as PM. The vote was triggered after the head of the group representing Tory MPs, received 54 letters from disgruntled parliamentary colleagues.
The threshold of 15% of the parliamentary party seeking a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister has been passed. Therefore, a vote of confidence will take place within the rules of the 1922 committee. That vote will take place this evening in the House of Commons between 6 and 8 o'clock, and we will announce the result shortly thereafter.
Boris Johnson's popularity has plummeted since revelations of parties in Downing Street that broke lockdown rules, one of which resulted in a fine for the Prime Minister. If he loses the confidence vote, Johnson will face a leadership challenge. His days as UK leader could be numbered.
All right, well, I'm glad now to bring in Lila Howson-Smith. She is the former special advisor to both Boris Johnson and the former British Prime Minister Theresa May. Great to see you. Thanks for taking the time. Let's not beat around the bush on this one. Can he survive?
So I think there's a number of questions here, really. I guess first, it's whether the inducements work. So whether his kind of carrot and stick methods can really kind of bring out a result in terms of turning around those wavering Conservative MPs. So we've heard today that he's been offering some promotions. So that's kind of clear the incentive. But he's also been talking about an early general election, which is really kind of quite unappealing to certain MPs that were elected back in 2019. So it's the question of whether that kind of combination can really bring on side those wavering Conservative MPs, those MPs that maybe don't support Boris or aren't in ministerial positions, whose support can't necessarily be counted on.
That absolutely is the question or the questions. But what about your prediction? Do you think he can survive?
So I think it's going to be closer than it looks. Definitely, I don't think today has gone as well as number 10 would have wanted. When I was working for Theresa May in the last leadership election, she had a number of more endorsements by this stage. So I think they've been coming in a bit slower. But that said, you know, the important thing to remember is that Boris Johnson automatically has sort of about 160 MPs on side, so nearly half the Conservative Party on side, because they fundamentally work for him. They are ministers or junior kind of parliamentary undersecretaries. So the key thing is here, can Boris Johnson make up that number through the backbenchers? And I think it looks extremely likely that he will, but that margin, sort of how big that majority is, will be really important to look at, particularly when you're thinking about how he survives kind of going forward and whether there continues to be that pressure on him and that drip effect that we've seen in recent weeks.
You said things might not have been going quite how he would have liked today when you compare that to Theresa May and when she faced this vote. I mean, it certainly came about very quickly. We've got MPs barely back from the Platinum Jubilee celebrations and now this vote. As a former special advisor, do you think that was part of the strategy, just to kind of go for it very quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Boris Johnson will have thought that kind of time, a short period of time is the best way to kind of get MPs on side, but also to ensure those rebels, those people that are clearly against him, don't have much time to organise, don't have much time to kind of galvanise support. I also think it's worth mentioning here that there aren't really that many kind of credible or clear alternatives in terms of other potential leadership rivals. Obviously, the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, has often been kind of the person that Boris Johnson was seen to be up against previously, and he's really seen quite a lot of knockbacks in recent months and weeks. So Boris Johnson there's no clear successor, which I think is very helpful to him, alongside with that kind of short time frame that you mentioned.
All right, Lila Howson-Smith, a former special advisor to both Boris Johnson and Theresa May. Thanks for being on the programme. Ryanair has been accused of racism after announcing that citizens in South Africa will be forced to take a test in Afrikaans before flying to Europe. Let's head over to the Cube now for more on this story. Matthew, it has generated an awful lot of talk online. What is going on?
Well, Helena, Ryanair, who are of course one of Europe's largest airlines, say that this is necessary to combat the high prevalence of fake South African passports. The company is now going to be requiring South African citizens to fill out what it says is a simple general knowledge questionnaire in Afrikaans. This before they are allowed to fly to the United Kingdom on Ryanair flights from other parts of Europe. Now, the questions on this test are going to be things like, who is South Africa's current president? And what is the country's international dialing code? And Ryanair says that if people aren't able to fill out this test, they won't be allowed to fly, but will be given a full refund. But the company has been widely criticised and accused of racial discrimination. Now, the reason for this is that South Africa has 11 official languages, and Afrikaans is just the third most widely spoken in the country, after Zulu and Xhosa. According to a 2011 census, just over 13% of South African citizens spoke Afrikaans as a first language. And it's also been viewed as the language of the oppressor, given that Afrikaans was forced on the country's black population during the era of apartheid. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of criticism online. Many people in the country say that they are disgusted by what they describe as highly insensitive racial profiling. And a German MP, Fabio De Masi, says that this new policy is like forcing Dutch or British tourists to take a test about apartheid in Xhosa before they are allowed to enter Cape Town. And it's also important to note, Helena, that the United Kingdom's High Commission in South Africa says that this is not an official government policy. This controversial Afrikaans test, general knowledge questionnaire, it seems to have come directly from Ryanair itself.
Well, Matthew, a very remarkable, controversial story, as you say. Thanks for bringing it to us. Mercedes-Benz has announced the immediate recall of nearly 1 million cars because of potential problems with their braking system. Now, the German luxury car maker says it'll contact owners of vehicles built between 2004 and 2015. Almost 1 million vehicles are affected, including 70,000 in Germany alone. Now, the models are from the ML and GL series of SUVs and R-Class luxury minivans. At least 50 people have been killed, including children, after gunmen opened fire at a Catholic church in southeastern Nigeria. Attackers shot inside the church in the town of Owo during Sunday Mass, while other gunmen waited outside for those trying to flee. Local authorities say that the gunmen escaped. No group has claimed responsibility for the massacre. Well, Wales has secured its place at the 2022 World Cup with a 1-0 win over Ukraine in their qualifier playoff final. An own goal by Ukraine's Andriy Yarmolenko sealed the victory for the hosts in Cardiff, and our sports editor Andy Rubini joins me to discuss what was a gripping game. An intensely emotional event, I think, as well, it's fair to say, Andy. The decisive goal coming perhaps in the cruelest of ways as well. So what does this mean then for Wales going forward?
Well, their fans will be delighted with this result. An overwhelming majority of them have never seen Wales at a World Cup tournament. Now, we've been associating Wales with this team that comes so close but stumbles at the final hurdle. We saw this in 77, 85, 93, but we have seen a different Wales national team in recent years. They qualified for Euro 2016, ending a 58-year wait for a major tournament. Then they qualified for 2020. It was a tough game, though. Gareth Bale's men, it was a difficult situation there against Ukraine. Very resilient team. Obviously, the condition back home galvanised the players. We saw it against Scotland a few days ago, and we saw it against Wales last night. Almost against the run of play, though, Wales managed to score thanks to a Yarmolenko own goal. But it was a good performance from Ukraine. 1-0 was the final score. It could have been way more, but some good performances there from the goalkeepers, especially Hennessy with a man-of-the-match performance to keep a clean sheet. When you talk about this game, you have to mention the supporters, though. They were absolutely fantastic. You know that football is often vilified. We saw these events at Saint-Denis, and the French Interior Minister started blaming the fans and then backtracked and said it was due to fake tickets. The thing is, football can probably bring the worst out of people because it's such a popular sport, but in most cases bring the best out of people. We saw this last night. These fans were great. 100 refugees were given free tickets by the Football Association of Wales, and now these fans will probably enjoy the Qatar World Cup. They're in the same group as England, the United States and Iran. A busy Sunday of sport as well. We've got Rafa Nadal winning the French Open at Roland Garros, but did the world number 4 give us any clues into next events? What's next for him, his future? Well, his press conference was not reassuring if you're a Nadal fan. He said, with the circumstances, I can't and don't want to keep going. I mean, first things first, what Nadal has done is remarkable, absolutely surreal. For any player to feature in 14 French Opens is outstanding, but he's actually won 14 of them, 22 Grand Slams. That's 2 more than his greatest rivals, Federer, Novak Djokovic. And what makes this even more incredible is that he's done this through injury. He was suffering from chronic foot problem. He nearly retired last year. He's had multiple injections throughout this tournament. He suffers from Müller-Weiss syndrome, which is a rare degenerative condition that affects bones in the feet. That's why he was limping during the Italian Open 10 days before Roland Garros actually started. In a few days' time, he'll undergo nerve-burning treatment. If this doesn't work, it means that he'll certainly miss out on Wimbledon, and also there's a good chance that he'll consider surgery. Now, when you're 36, you know that surgery, there's a bit of a time there to come back. Will he want to do this at the age of 36 or retire before? Only he knows, but I hope he'll stay for a few more years if he can.
And I'm sure, of course, many fans around the world wishing the same. Our sports editor, Andy Rubini, good to talk to you. Thank you, Andy. Now, as the sun rose over France's Normandy beaches on the 6th of June, a small band of brothers got together to remember D-Day, as well as to pay their respects to comrades who lay down their lives to give Europe the gift of peace. Tom Hill reports now.
It took 5 years, 5 long...
A dozen veterans in Normandy for D-Day. Heroes who waded ashore to turn the tide of tyranny across Europe.
They thought they would be safe. They would be wrong.
Among that force, a 19-year-old medic. Now 98, the Native American soldier said a prayer for lost friends, but also passed on a message for today's victims of war.
Ukraine is a very sad situation. I feel sorry for the people there, and I don't know why this war had to come, but I think the human being likes to, I think they like to fight, I don't know, but we see this and now what's going on. In 1944 I landed on these beaches and we thought we would bring peace to the world, but it's not possible.
156,000 soldiers from America, Britain, Canada and other countries attacked France on D-Day, storming its beaches but also landing by parachute and gliders. As each year passes, veteran numbers dwindle, but the sacrifices they made to ensure peace live on, even in times of uncertainty. Tom Hill, Euronews.
You're up to date. I'll see you soon.